share that. Yeah, screen share and then okay, great. Yeah, I'm gonna start recording also because to have this as a backup. So thank you all so much for coming today, and I really appreciate the presentation today. I think it's going to be really interesting. A lot of people I've talked to are quite interested in it. So I'm going to just get rid of this background business while the last people straggle in. I know we usually start at 5 after, but I thought we should start on time today and but cover this which I cover most times. Oh, let's see. So let's see. So yeah, thanks so much to everyone for their present participation. And if you have any ideas about future speakers, just please let me know. Our upcoming meeting in 2 weeks we'll continue on our business for what we plan to actually produce from the Digital Pathology Working Group. We've had 2 papers so far, and hopefully we'll have another paper maybe by the time of the next Banff meeting or around or after that time. We did a survey, and so we'll continue the survey analysis, and then maybe even we've talked about a Delphi project to improve benchmarking and also establish an image bank, because that's one of our aims is to establish an image bank and then establish Banff algorithms and then conduct competitions or trials and challenges and then rethink the innovation timeline. In 4 weeks, we'll have, Kim Soles will present on AI optimism in nephrology. So that'll be awesome. I think that was based on a talk that he gave in India with Agnes Fogo, and then he presented it at the University of Alberta, ran rounds. So should be great. It's also on YouTube, and I think I put that link in the email. And then Richard Levinson will present the middle of June, and he's always a great speaker, so I look forward to that. On July the 3rd, since it's the day before the U.S. Holiday, I didn't think we'd have a speaker because I didn't want to take any away from anybody. So, we'll just continue also with a survey analysis. By then, I think we'll probably have another survey, which we're going to send to a larger audience. But we'll talk about that some more. And then on July the 17th, from the Mayo Clinic, Alexander Denick, we really look forward to that. He does amazing work in morphometry in the kidney, and also he's doing a lot of AI also, I think. So thanks to everyone for their participation. Again, please let me know if you have any ideas. Also, I wanted to mention, and Kim asked me to mention this, that if you're a member of the American Society of Nephrology, there's an AI-powered kidney care network. So he encouraged people to please subscribe to that. And I think there's going to be a lot of discussions on that. He has a presentation with a collaborator of his, Haba Mahal. And so I think they're going to be talking about some things there. But I don't want to take away too much time. I think I'm going to turn it over to our speaker today and really appreciate your speaking. And yeah, so thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to you.
All right, can you see my screen okay?
Yeah, it looks great. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much, Brad, Kim, and Lynn, for the wonderful invitation to speak in this forum for the Banff Digital Pathology Work Group. I'd like to basically discuss with you how we do completely remote medical renal telepathology at the Hennepin County Medical Center. My name is Zeljko Dvanajscak. I'll go by Z. Some of you may have seen some portions of these images and a portion of this talk that I gave at GlomCon. However, at GlomCon, we had some technical issues. Hopefully, this will be a new and improved version of the same talk. Let me get my laser pointer here. All right, so what are the distances we're talking about? How remote am I? So the lab is located in downtown Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I currently live in Southeast Florida, which is about a distance of about 1,700 miles. And for those of you outside the United States, it's about 2,800 kilometers, which is a similar distance if you were to go by car from Amsterdam down to Athens. However, you'll see the difference here. In Europe, you would have many more beautiful sites like zoos, museums, and castles, whereas in America, you would have mostly road construction all the way down. So this is the distance that I'm working remotely. And of course, distance is not really anymore any sort of a variable. This project, just historically to let you know, started in Little Rock, Arkansas at Arcana Labs, and they were the first to be generous enough to purchase one of these machines. First we demoed it, then we purchased it, and had a lot of fun with it back in the middle of the COVID pandemic. It took me about a year and a half to figure out a way to utilize digital pathology to make it available for fully remote, high throughput renal pathology. So that's where it started, after which I moved to South Florida. And then after that, I switched to the Hennepin County Medical Center in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I want to talk to you a little bit about this hospital. It's located downtown, beautiful downtown Minneapolis. It's actually right across the street from the Vikings Stadium and the Mississippi River. Here's the hospital. It takes up about 7 city blocks. It's a huge hospital, about 500 hospital inpatient beds. It's owned by the county, and it's a big safety net center for the entire region. And the renal pathology department there has been around since 1972. It was started by Dr. Crossan. And essentially, the hospital services renal pathology for the greater Minneapolis area, as well as regions around it, including Wisconsin, Iowa, North and South Dakota. And of note, since 1995, the Chronic Disease Research Group at Hennepin Healthcare Research Institute has been administering the federal United States Renal Data System, which is a big national registry that collects, analyzes, and distributes information about chronic kidney disease and ESRD in the United States. So lots of kidney work and lots of nephrologists. We have a group of about 45 nephrologists working at Hennepin. Now, what makes all of this remote digital pathology possible is this machine here. This machine became available by Olympus, and it's managed by a company called Evident. They do most of the service and field work. And the machine is called the VS200 Slide View, and it became available on the market in January of 2022 in the throes of the COVID pandemic. So it came right at the perfect time. And here's what our current setup at Hennepin looks like. The machine is quite large, weighs about 300 pounds, and it sits on a very solid air table. The reason we have an air table, and here's the air compressor. The purpose of the air table is to essentially minimize any vibrations from the ambient environment that may be transferred onto the slides, especially when you're doing high magnification scanning at 60x or 100x. And there's significant construction in and around the hospital. So this air table is really critical for that. This little black box here is the APC battery backup. The green box here is the fluorescence box. You can see it's a very, very large fluorescence box. On the left here, this portion of the scanner contains and houses all of the objectives, the filters, camera components, light microscopy components, as well as the barcode reader. And then on top here is the fluorescence camera, and there's a separate internal camera for bright field. On the right side here, and this is an optional thing you can purchase with the machine, is a slide loader. It can hold up to 210 slides or 35 trays with 6 slides per tray. And then we have a PC and essentially 2 large 4K monitors for the technicians to use. And then, of course, this is the most fun. We have a Pac-Man style joystick that you can use to adjust the mechanical stage located within the scanner. A little bit about scanner specifications and what it's capable of. The most important thing about this scanner, and big kudos to the Olympus engineers, is they were essentially able to transfer all of the observation methods from a regular desktop microscope and then some into this machine. So the machine can do bright field fluorescence, you can do dark field phase contrast, and most importantly for renal pathology, you can do polarization and you can also do fluorescence. The objectives that are compatible are essentially your entire line of objectives all the way up to 100x on a 6-piece motorized turret. And you can also do automatic oil dispensing for hematopathology if needed. The stage is fully motorized, as is focusing. The capacity, like I said, up to 35 slide trays with 210 slides maximum at a time. A little bit about scan time. The current industry standard is how quickly can it scan a 15 millimeter square area at 20x, and it can do it in about 1.5 minutes. So it's relatively fast, definitely, certainly competitive in comparison to many of the other scanners on the market. And then we have a number of capabilities of the software, including artificial intelligence integration, which I will talk about here shortly. I think the primary advantage of this machine, on top of its ability to do fluorescence and polarization, is the fact that many of the components from the regular desktop Olympus microscope are completely interchangeable with the machine, and that includes the objectives. So you can have the exact same objectives that you have on your typical BX53, for instance, microscope in the machine, and this is what it looks like on the inside. So the objectives are interchangeable, as well as the fluorescence filters that typically sit in the turret right below the eyepiece. They can be placed here, and then this little cylindrical component here, the scanner, is the barcode reader, and here's the mechanized stage. So the fact that you can switch out these components, you can use the exact same components that you're seeing on the regular microscope, makes it possible to have images that are indistinguishable from the scanner to the ones that you would see looking at a regular microscope. Here's just an example. It's a rather busy slide just to demonstrate that essentially every component that's movable on a regular microscope has been robotically mechanized on the Olympus VS200. So essentially all of the light components, all the fluorescence and polarization components, completely customizable, exposure times, gains, etc. And very importantly, the polarization angle can even be changed. And we like to use the 0-degree extinction angle. And then we use the very, very powerful light sources to push light through an extinction angle in polarized microscopy, making it much more robust and powerful than a regular microscope that you would use on your desk. Now, when we build various scanning conditions, they're highly customizable further. You can overlay individual fluorescence channels. So here's an example where we use the DAPI nuclear stain channel, and then we can overlay the actual DAPI with the green channel and a red fluorescence channel at various magnifications. We can even do virtual Z stacking, and then you can do auto exposure or manual exposure that's highly customizable down to the milliseconds, and you can control the maximum exposure as well as the display limits, the histogram display limits for fluorescence. So overall, it took me admittedly about 1.5 years to figure out how to use this machine. It's extremely sophisticated and quite complicated, and it took a lot of me learning about optics that I didn't really have in my training, but that was the funnest part of the project, I must say. Now here's what it looks like for the technician who's running the scanner, who's scanning both our renal pathology as well as surgical pathology slides. It's really fun and quite user-friendly. On the left here, you have the trays, and the machine will know based on a number of sensors in the tray loader which tray has a slide in it. And then on each tray, it will also know which slides are actually located in which position. At this point, we have a number of customized scanning conditions, some of which are fully automatic and some of which are more manual. And we have conditions for bright field, we have conditions for fluorescence, and then special conditions for polarization. And I will demonstrate some of these slides towards the end of my talk. So essentially, they'll select which slides. You can do this individually. You can do this in a large batch. You can set this to go overnight. It's really fun and user-friendly for the technicians. The first thing the machine does is it will do a brief overview of the slide label at 2x. And the reason it does that is because it tries to detect the 2D QC barcode. And this has a number of data associated with it. Most importantly, it has the case number, which then allows us to automatically organize the slides as they're coming off the scanner in a highly automated fashion. The second thing it does is it will do a very brief 30-second overview of the entire slide at low magnification at 2x. At which point we have artificial intelligence algorithms, neural networks that step in and identify tissue and ignore the background, right? So we're training it, and we're still training it to ignore some of these artifacts, to ignore the label, to ignore things like markers, and to just focus on the tissue and to scan that. The next step, of course, is it will lay down focus points at a density that you can predetermine. It can be really high density or low density. And at this point, the machine will then go through the individual focus points, focus at various Z-plane levels, and then do the full scan across the entire section of the tissue, and everything in between is essentially ignored. And then the data is pushed to a separate drive from the computer. It is placed into a folder that's named after the case number. So it's very easy to find, and you'll have a bunch of slides in there. When you open that, you can actually see the overlay of the slide and the metadata folder adjacent to it. Currently, the way we name our files is case number followed by date and timestamp down to the second, which makes it essentially impossible to accidentally overwrite a slide. And then you can click on this, and this is in a format called VSI. It's a highly, highly compressed proprietary Olympus format, but it's very much promiscuous. You can open it with many other different viewing software platforms. So it's a really nice and easy way to, and I'll demonstrate how we do this. You can essentially click on this and drag it into your viewing software, and you can open it in a way that's analogous to how radiologists open their films. A little bit of data here about the speed of scanning at various magnifications. So up here we have some of our small examples, like our toluidine blue stained thick sections, and then sort of an average sized kidney biopsy, and then a larger sized kidney biopsy. Most of our scans are done at 20x. For something this small, it's really rapid, about 12 seconds. Average about 35 seconds, and some of the larger ones will take a minute and a half or so to scan. And you can see the differences based on magnifications. The important thing here, and this is the thing that really makes a difference, I think, in this platform compared to some of the other ones I've seen, is how compressed the slides are. So something this size at 20x is only 729 megabytes. So I'll talk more about how much space this takes up on our drives. So some more file size data and speed. So if you compare fluorescence to regular bright field, fluorescence is by nature slower for a number of reasons. That's because the exposure time is higher on individual frames, but it's not much slower. So if you have 20x scanning time for something of comparable size that takes 35 seconds on bright field, might take 47 seconds on fluorescence, and at higher magnification, a minute and a half to about a minute 50 seconds or so. So it's about 30% slower for fluorescence. File size data, and this has been consistent from Arcana to Hennepin. So I most recently collected data on about 152 renal biopsies done here at Hennepin. An average number of slides per case is 25. This includes toll blues and some additional slides, deepers, special stains, etc. And average file size per full case is only about 5.8 gigabytes. So that's the entire renal biopsy load. And it ranges from 3 to 10 gigabytes per case, depending on how much tissue you have. So this makes it possible to have something small as an 8 terabyte drive for us to have essentially all of our renal stuff, all of our research stuff, and all of our surgical pathology into an 8 terabyte drive. And that's we've had that for about a year and a half now. We're looking to expand shortly, but essentially the bottom line is you don't need tremendous amount of file storage with this proprietary format, and that's because average slide is only about 240 megabytes in this VSI format. All right, a little bit about how this was validated for clinical use. I think many of you know about this very important article that came out from the regulatory agencies, essentially allowing us to validate for clinical use any scanner. And we did this originally at Arcana, and then the same thing was done at Hennepin when I switched over. And the data from validation is very, very similar between the two labs. So we'll talk about minor discordances, and these are discordances that wouldn't make an impact on patient care. The most prevalent was of course glom counts. So you have the same pathologist read the slides on glass, followed by digitally after a minimum 2 week washout period. And the funny thing is you can't really reach the same glom counts twice for the most pathologists. So I always get a chuckle out of this, especially with glom counts. We can never be spot on. 28% of them had some degree of immunofluorescence discordance. And importantly, out of those, 94% were only off by trace or 1+. And the vast majority of those were off on stains with the most amount of nonspecific staining, such as IgM and C3. So overall, the fluorescence discordance was really quite good. And as far as estimation of IFTA, there was discordance of only about 11%, and vast majority of those were off only by 1 degree, mild to moderate, etc. So the minor discordances were, in a way, very predictable. As far as major discordances, thankfully, we only had a single case at Arcana, and this was, upon further review, deemed secondary to human error. The slide was mislabeled as a control and therefore was misread. So essentially, if you subtract that, there's essentially no major discordance. So it's a really, really robust system. And in many ways, the pathologists that have been part of this validation strategy have determined that this is a much more superior way of viewing a kidney biopsy. And hopefully I'll be able to demonstrate that to you with some slides. I'd like to spend a couple of minutes talking about how we utilize artificial intelligence to help us with scanning here. Thankfully, Olympus has developed a deep learning technology for rapid automated tissue detection. It's called True AI. It's a very robust system where we can essentially train and develop our own algorithms to have really high fidelity scanning. For instance, here's an example of a slide where we will have a map that we train the algorithm. So this is a kidney biopsy on Jones. The red areas here are what we're telling the algorithm, what we're training the algorithm is the background. So we're trying to teach it to ignore everything outside. We give it a buffer zone. And then the green map is what we tell the machine is actual tissue. For stuff that we're not sure, we just sort of leave it blank. And we do this over and over again. Most recent algorithm that's actually currently running on a separate computer has been running for, at this point, I took this screenshot yesterday, it was running for about 68 hours. Right now, it's well over 90 hours. And the way this works is you basically feed it a large number of maps that are painstakingly made by both myself and some of our laboratory aides as well as volunteers. We have about 200 maps that we've fed the algorithm for bright field. This includes surgical pathology slides, as well as cytology and kidney biopsies. And essentially what we do is we hit play and the machine runs and it makes an iteration rapidly, about 1 per second. And at predetermined iteration intervals, it will stop and create a neural network, at which point it calculates the similarity as a percentage between what we told it is tissue versus background in comparison from what it thinks is tissue in the background. And now as the time goes on, over many, many hours and days, the algorithm gets better and better and better. And this one is currently at 94% similarity at about 1 million iterations, or about 68 hours of straight computing on a totally separate and dedicated platform. And down here, you can see on the axis here, the similarity percentage. And down here are all the various iterations. And here it stopped at 1 million and it calculated a similarity of about 93%. And you can see that the similarity will vacillate over time, but the trend line is going up. So as it trains, the longer it trains, the better it gets at identifying tissue and better it gets at ignoring what's on the background. And this is a project that's going on in conjunction with validating fluorescence for both surgical pathology, kidney pathology, and surgical pathology has been very useful for the entire team because we can also do skin biopsies, skin fluorescence, as well as heart immunofluorescence with the full kidney platform. So it's this is always happening in the background. And for us currently, the artificial intelligence is only used for tissue detection, but I hope to in the future use it for development of some diagnostic algorithms. And I think the first thing I'll do is develop a mechanism to count the glomeruli and to also develop algorithms for estimation of IFTA. But that's in the future. And here's a product that we have currently. So if you do a 2x overview slide with artificial intelligence, the machine is able to identify controlled tissue and the kidney cores while simultaneously essentially ignoring what's a rather pretty dirty slide. We purposefully fed it dirty slides with lots of markers and imperfections in the background to teach it to ignore the background. It does a really, really, really good job of that at this point. So much so that we're actually able to do the same thing for fluorescence. So all of our overviews on fluorescence are done with the help of a nuclear stain that we include as part of our cover slipping media. So automatically on frozen tissue, as well as on paraffin immunofluorescence, you get a nuclear stain that the machine can now see on fluorescence. And then oftentimes, for reasons that are unclear to me, you get a shadow in blue that extends from the slide label. And this artificial intelligence algorithm is able to read through that shadow to identify tissue below it. So it's really quite amazing in ignoring the background and identifying the tissue for fully automated and really, really rapid scanning. All right, at this point, I'd like to switch over and demonstrate what this looks like. Give me just a minute to switch out of this screen. The software that we use to view our slides, and can you see this, Brad? Am I still
Yeah,
sharing?
that looks good. I can see your Olympus application.
All right, excellent.
Thank
So the Olympus application is called Olympus Olivia, and it's a completely free download from the Olympus website. So you don't need to spend tens of thousands of dollars just for a viewer. We do highly recommend using 4K monitors at least for this. We learned that the hardware Canon, the 1080p simply don't have enough resolution. But here's an example of what it would look like. You can highly customize what this looks like from the user end. And I use two large 32-inch monitors in my office here at home. And I'd like to start with some very basic slides here. Since this is a pathology transplant working group, I'd like to show you what a transplant slide would look like on Brightfield. I'm removing the slide label. It's a separate layer just to not include any patient identifying information. But essentially what you get is something like this. Here's the entire slide. And as you roll your mouse, you can zoom in wherever you put the cursor very rapidly. You can see here that the overview is included, but you have multiple layers, and you can remove the overview at 2x just to see your 20x scan here. It's really, really rapid and quite easy to use. And you have a number of very interesting features like this little magnifying tool that I really like, where you can quickly browse and look at areas of the biopsy when you're on low power. And of course, here's a very interesting artery we should probably take a look at, and a vessel with high-grade vascular transmural rejection here. The beautiful thing is you can also do quite a bit of annotating. So you can add things like arrows. You can add things like little ink dots, shapes. You can add text boxes. And we use this a lot when we're training our nephrology fellows and our pathology residents that rotate through. And it's very easy to point out things, as well as when you're conferencing and talking to your colleagues. You can quickly go to a lesion and annotate it so you can see it from low power. The other nice thing is you have the ability to measure areas and distances. So you can measure the distances and sizes of gloms and vessels and cores, etc. So this is how we view our Brightfield. It's all essentially done at 20x. We do have some 40x things that we reserve for 40x scans, and I'll demonstrate that as well. But first, I'd like to show you some of our immunohistochemistry. Here's the SV40 with our control. And then even from low power here, you can start to see some positivity that's easy to detect with the magnifying tool. And then you can go in and take a look at your rather really beautiful immunohistochemical slides and Brightfield slides. Everything is automatically white balanced from the background, and it gives you an ability to render images that are really quite nice. I'll show you a few more Brightfield images before we go on to fluorescence. Here's an example of our Jones stain just to demonstrate how robust this scanning is at 20x. I know a lot of scanners out on the market prefer to scan with 40x. We feel that 20x is sufficient. You can see here's an MPGN pattern, glomerulonephritis. I believe this was cryoglobulonemic GN, scanned to 20x. And you can see really nice resolution, double contouring, lobular accentuation, etc. And it's really easy to jump around and move around and look at various gloms. And then, of course, you can go down to the digital zoom. So this is what 40x digital zoom looks like. And it's really quite nice. You can also scan with 40x and it'll give you even higher resolution. But we feel that for renal pathology, 20x is sufficient for most everything that we need. Of course, you have other wonderful tools like the image navigator that I usually have on my other screen. And this is a nice tool because you can bounce around quickly around different areas of the biopsy, and then you can change the magnification as well. So making visualization very, very quite easy. And then we have another beautiful tool here, the cropping tool. And we do this routinely where we can make collages and images that we save routinely for all of our cases that we can then incorporate into our conferences and our reports. And the nice thing is you always get the scale bar here that's calibrated at each magnification level. So you get essentially publication quality images for our nephrologists and colleagues. And that's really quick and easy, and you can save these as TIFFs or JPEGs. And that's all on a separate monitor. All right, a little bit of bright field there. Let's see, what else do we have? Just want to show you a couple of bug stains. And all of our bug stains we do at 40x. So here's a GMS with some fungal forms that you can see here. Here's a large fungal abscess here in a lung from an autopsy. Kidney, you can see the fungal forms at 40x here in the vessel. So the 40x we utilize mostly for our viral stains and for our bacterial stains. Here's an example of AFB for mycobacteria. This is tuberculosis of the lung. So just to give you an idea of how nice the resolution is at 40x, and the distances we're talking about here is only, a couple of microns for these bacilli. So we can use 40x, we can go up to 60x on air, and we can also do 60x with oil immersion, and then of course 100x for heme path use, although we haven't validated that here yet. But just so you know, we do have oil immersion capability that's automated with the machine. All right, so that's bright field. Now let's switch over and talk a little bit about what the fluorescence looks like. I've already mentioned that it takes a little bit longer to scan these slides, but not much longer. And here's an example of a C4D on a positive case, transplant case. And what's nice is if you turn on the overview, you can now see what the overview looks like. Here's that shadow from the label that the machine can read through, and the DAPI signal underneath that the machine uses both to identify tissue and to focus on the tissue. And then it'll switch channels to then capture a really nice high resolution 20x image for C4D. You can see some positivity here in peritubular capillaries. The nice feature about fluorescence is that you have this histogram adjust display tool. So if you zoom out, you have two bars here on the left and on the right, and then it goes from 0 to 60, almost 70,000 grayscale values. That is the resolution of our high fidelity fluorescence camera. So it has an incredible amount of resolution. And the beautiful thing is you can click on this scale bar here and adjust your fluorescence intensity. And you can certainly do this on your desktop microscope, but it requires changing the intensity on your fluorescence box. Here you can do this on the fly. It does take a little bit of training for the pathologist to get used to this, because it's really easy to overcall something. It's also easy to undercall something, but it does take, with a little bit of training, you use essentially your background as a tool to help you adjust this display. And it's really nice because then you can really focus on where exactly the stain is positive and where it's negative, and I'll demonstrate that further. So this is a very, very useful tool. Olivia has this. Some of the other platforms, from what I've seen, most of the other platforms out on the market don't have this tool, so you're unable to do the histogram adjustment on the fly, and Olivia is superior for that reason. So that's a C4D. Let me show you a few other ones. Here's an example of, I think anybody can quickly diagnose this as membranous glomerulopathy. You can see fine granular staining, mostly of the capillary loops. And then I'll show you another one. And with this, I will demonstrate another feature that's extremely useful. So here's an IgA nephropathy case. And then we have this tool called split unsplit document groups, where you can put two slides immediately adjacent to each other and compare them at various magnifications. And here you can see the difference between granular capillary loop staining and granular mesangial staining that's avoiding the capillary loops. So this ability to completely juxtapose two images is super useful. I use it all the time. And I'll demonstrate this further. And for fluorescence, comparing kappa and lambda this way. And the other thing you can do is you can lock them together and move them around together. And you can also, if you lock them this way, when you adjust your histogram, they're adjusted equally based on the exact same exposure time and the exact same presets. So all of our fluorescence is scanned with one scanning condition, and then they're adjusted by the histogram after the fact. All right, so that's membranous IgA. I'd like to show you a few other really nice examples. Here's a lupus nephritis example. I like to show this one because you can really see beautiful glomerular staining in the mesangium and the capillary loops, as well as some extraglomerular staining here, manifested as tissue type A and A pattern in the nuclei, as well as some extraglomerular staining, granular staining pattern along this vessel here. So that's a beautiful thing about this technology is you can really see high fidelity glomerular staining as well as extraglomerular staining. And then thank you, big thanks to Astrid Wiens over at Harvard, who has told us now what this finding means, which is the fine podocyte dusting of the anti-nephrin in primary podocytopathies. And you can see that really, really nicely on immunofluorescence here. And sometimes, even if it's really faint, you can actually increase the intensity to really detect the signal on very, very faint samples. So that's another benefit of this technology is you can amplify the signal to see extremely subtle things like fine podocyte dusting in primary podocytopathies. Furthermore, you can take this a step further. So here's an example of how Alport is scanned currently at Arcana. On the top left here is you have collagen type 4 alpha 5. On the left is alpha 2 control. And then when you overlay them together, you put the two channels on top of each other, you can clearly now see that there is segmental loss of collagen type 4 alpha 5 in this case. So very, very useful tool here as well. And then if you want to get really fancy, you can do a triple overlay. So here's the LRP2 stain in anti-brush border antibody disease. Here's the stain. It's detectable by the red filter, Cy3. You can see a tubule here, the apical brush border, and then the abnormal transcytosed immune complex deposition along the basement membrane. Sometimes in these cases, it becomes really difficult to orient yourself because you have tremendous acute tubular injury. So you don't know where the basement membrane is. You don't know where the apical brush border is, especially on these narrow filters for fluorescence. So then what you can use is the autofluorescence feature of the tissue on the green filter, overlay that with the DAPI signal, and then when you put them all together, you have three different fluorescence channels. You get a beautiful image like this where it's essentially impossible for you to misorient yourself. You know that this is the apical brush border because you have a cell with the nucleus in between the two, and this is clearly the basement membrane. So this is the feature that this is really difficult to pull off. Obviously, on a regular microscope, you have to switch on your turret between the various filters and the channels to render an image like this, and it's laborious. Whereas this is a customized scanning condition, so your final product looks like something down here on the bottom right, and then you can use your histogram to adjust the exposure of each channel to make really, really nice images that are really quite easy to interpret. All right, so that's my demonstration of fluorescence. Let's switch over to polarization. And we're going to start with this case here. This is not a transplant case, but I like showing this one because you have the H&E here, and then you have some crystals here that look like calcium phosphate, but then if you look carefully, you're seeing some clear crystals down here in the interstitium and the tubules. And then when you polarize this and put them next to each other, you can really see how much birefringent crystal deposition there is here. And then when you go to the same exact area at the same exact magnification, so let's make this 10x and this 10x as well. You can then lock them together and move around, and now you see the crystals that are birefringing on the right. So this is a polarized scan done at 0 degrees. And then we adjust the exposure so that you can see the background histology that comes through, the extinction angle, and then you can clearly see that your crystals are nicely polarizing, whereas the calcium phosphate up here is not polarizing, or not birefringing, I should say. So that's a very useful technique as well. So this is how we do calcium oxalate. So we have a customized technique for calcium oxalate and other crystal polarization on formalin-fixed paraffin-embedded tissue. We'll take it a step further. We'll talk about amyloid, and here's how we scan amyloid currently at Hennepin. So we have our liver control here, and then here's a kidney case where you can clearly see on bright field that there's quite a bit of vasculophilic amyloid here. But to make this extra robust, we also scan all of our fluorescence with the red Cy3 filter. And what this does is increases the sensitivity of detecting even minute amounts of amyloid because it really pops up from the background. So if you see the comparison here on Congo Red has some variability from day to day, and sometimes it can be difficult to determine what's background, what's red blood cells, and what's actual amyloid. Whereas here, if you use that same exact area on the fluorescence filter, you can see how robust that fluorescent signal is. So it makes it much easier to actually detect amyloid, and then you can lock them and move them around together. And then, of course, we can take this to next level and produce a polarized image of that exact same tissue. And here's what it looks like. The polarizer is really quite robust for amyloid. I think it's far superior to regular desktop microscope because the light source is so powerful that it can render a very bright image at the extinction angle. In fact, it's so powerful that the bright field light source is capable of exciting the DAPI signal. So you can polarize essentially anything, and then you can lock this, move around, and you can see that the amyloid in this vessel is apple green to yellow, and the collagen in the background surrounding this vessel is white. So it's a really robust polarizer for amyloid. So that's what that looks like. And then we can take this even further, and we'll talk about this case. This is probably my favorite case from this year because of how subtle it was. So we have a fairly large amount of frozen tissue here. This was stained with IgG and scanned by irregular fluorescence. And there's a very interesting area down here where you have a glomerulus. We'll go to 40x. You have a glomerulus here and a vessel. And then if you look very carefully, there appears to be a cleft-like space within this vessel wall, right? And, I was concerned what's going on here. So I overlaid a polarized scan on top of our frozen scan. And this is also a customized scanning condition where at the end what you get is multiple layers, including a polarized scan here. So when you polarize, you can suddenly see the cholesterol microemboli here. And this was a case of a patient who developed AKI status post AAA repair. And this was on their clinical differential. So now you can see these crystals that are, of course, dissolved out on formalin-fixed paraffin-embedded tissue, but are definitely visible here on frozen tissue. And then you can overlay these channels to get your really robust image. I'll show you some more examples. Here's one where you have a vessel essentially chock full of cholesterol embolization. And then here's another, this is my favorite, where you have a little artery and an arteriole coming off with cholesterol microemboli. Here's some lodged at the hilum, and then a few little pieces even made its way into the capillary loops here. And that's very easy to detect with this type of scan on fluorescence. And this is a customized scan that needs to be ordered separately. All right, so that's basically just wanted to give you a rundown of some of the techniques that we have for bright field fluorescence and polarization. Of course, the machine can also do additional things like dark field imaging, which is nice for in vitro work. But I haven't really done a whole lot with that. It was essentially a project where we were able to fully digitize this. And one other thing I will say as far as how high throughput this is, as you know, Arcana will do 25,000 kidney biopsies per year. We were able to do 7 per day. But that all depends on when you start scanning. If you start scanning in early morning, you can crank in 10, 12 full renal cases per day. So it's extremely high throughput, and it makes fully remote, full-time renal pathology possible, where we can own the entire case, meaning fluorescence and polarization microscopy, and therefore render a diagnosis in a way that is really robust and very accurate, and in my personal opinion, far superior to a regular desktop microscope. And I'll end it with that. With this slide, I want to thank a few people. First of all, big recognition to Arcana for being the first to allow me to play with these machines and to demo them and to develop them into something that's clinically usable. So thank you, Arcana, and a big thanks to Hennepin, and especially to our hardworking technicians, our laboratory aides, our histotechs, our laboratory coordinators, our supervisors, everybody that's involved in handling our tissue, processing our tissue, and then doing a great job of scanning it to make it possible for the pathologist to read material essentially from anywhere in the world. And I'll end it with that. I'll take any questions.
Wow, that was amazing. That was a great talk, and I really appreciate it. I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to let everyone else go first because I saw some people raise their hands and such. I saw Jesper and others, so I'll just let other people go first. But thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Lynn, would you like to go for
Yeah,
it?
I'll start. I just want to say thanks so much and just comment to everyone. You had mentioned Dr. Crossan in the beginning, who's retired, but he was a renal pathologist who taught us renal pathology in medical school at University of Minnesota, and was one of the reasons I got interested in renal pathology from the very beginning. Yeah, there he is.
There he is.
Um, and I talked to him a few months ago, and he told me he was talking about your work, praising you. He said, I told the people in charge at Hennepin, whatever Z wants to do, let him do it. He really knows what he's talking about, and he's such a visionary, and just let him do whatever he wants to do. Don't hold him back. So anyway, I just want to congratulate you on all this work that you've done. Now I do have a question, long term, thinking really long term, there are many, and short term too, I guess there are many advantages of a digital service. Like, as you had mentioned, a renal pathologist can work from anywhere, and there's a shortage of renal pathologists, it seems, right now. And that's really to the advantage of any center to be able to hire some renal pathologists from anywhere else, especially if a place has a smaller volume and can't support a renal pathologist at their own center. And then, of course, looking to the future, if we can have some kind of AI mechanism, to find AFB positive, organisms or whatever. This kind of thing would be really helpful. But what's the additional cost per case? This is my question. What's the additional cost just for slide scanning and overall? And then how are you saving these files too? I remember you had said it at Arcana, you were discarding them after a certain period of time. Now, you had mentioned that this file size is so small, so there really isn't a disadvantage to saving them. And then you could use them, of course, use these cases to train some AI algorithms. But that's my question now, is what is the additional cost to scan all of your materials, especially the IF slides?
Yeah, great questions. I'll first comment on your original estimation that this opens up the world for bringing in subspecialty expertise, especially to programs with a low volume. Our program is, I think, sort of medium volume, and we were actually able to. We're in the process currently of proctoring a couple of docs in Wisconsin at the Wisconsin Diagnostic Clinic, Dr. Carl Durnell and Dr. Alex Gallen. I think some of you probably know the two of them very well. They're actually being proctored to read remotely from Wisconsin and to cover for me when I'm out. So suddenly we have 3 fellowship-trained renal pathologists when, 2 years ago, there was essentially, they're struggling, like most programs are, to find a renal pathologist. We're rare birds and really hard to find. So that essentially overnight opened up the ability to bring on additional talent to help us read these biopsies and for coverage and Saturday stuff and stuff like that. So that's my first comment. I think that's the major advantage. The second thing is the additional cost. So currently we don't have a dedicated scanning technician, although I think this is where this is headed. At Arcana, they do have a dedicated scanning technician, which is a lab aid level position that doesn't require really any significant amount of training or a college degree because this machine is so incredibly easy to use. So that's depending on your volume. Right now, we use lab aides and technicians that have time in between things. So whoever has some time to scan will jump in and scan. It's sort of a free for all effort. But really, the best way to do this is to have a dedicated scanning person, a full-time scanning tech who can do this. Because for us, the goal is to then transition into using this really robustly for surgical pathology and to do large volume overnight scanning. And for that, you definitely need somebody to load and unload, clean the slides, to make sure the slide quality is coming out well, that the AI algorithm is functioning well. Some might have to be rescanned manually, so it does require some effort. But really, the cost is not honestly that high, but certainly something to consider. I would recommend having somebody dedicated. But like I said, it's super easy to use. You can train anybody to use this actually really quickly, and it's been a lot of fun. Hopefully, Medicaid will help us out soon, Medicare and Medicaid. We do have the additional CPT codes for telepathology that are not being reimbursed currently, but hopefully will be soon. to help take the edge off of some of this additional lab technical time that's required to get this scanned. But it does allow for high throughput work. And then your last comment, going into the future of AI, that's certainly the dream here, is to have this technology identify things that are easy to miss, in particular, vascular rejection in transplants, foci of tubulitis, double contouring, things of that nature, also focal necrotizing lesions, and then the little things like the AFB bugs. I think that would be the primary thing. The other thing is just to take off the load of some of the laborious work, namely counting glomeruli across various sections on fluorescence and light microscopy. And that's where it's headed. But for right now, we're still in the process of developing AI for automated tissue detection. Once that's robust for both fluorescence and bright field, we're going to switch over to doing this for more diagnostic types of algorithms in the future. And that might rely on true AI or additional platforms for artificial intelligence. But I think that's clearly, Lynn, the obvious next step is to use this for both fluorescence. And the other thing that it can do, and I forgot to mention this, is that it can actually, the technology has the ability to quantify the amount of fluorescent signal. So now you can be a little bit more objective about estimating the intensity of fluorescence, for instance, on IgA or membranous cases or lupus cases, et cetera. So that's another thing where you can, if you expose something at a particular millisecond value, at a particular histogram value, that it will give you the same result over and over again that you can then quantify and use the technology to essentially do much more accurate and quantifiable estimation of fluorescence intensity. I hope that answers your questions. Oh, and the last thing about slide storage and whether we discard them or not, it essentially depends on what your institution can handle as far as how much you can store. We currently have an 8 terabyte drive here. Storage is becoming cheaper and cheaper by the year. It'll be easy for us to double that. And, I've been here for about a year and a half, and now we're going to switch into really high throughput, high level surgical pathology scanning that, has much more tissues. It's going to take up more volume, more storage space. So we're just going to need additional drives for that. We might have a separate drive for surgical pathology, and then we have to save the glass slides anyways, and then certainly there's an option to discard the volume of this data after a certain point, maybe after 3 months or 6 months or after a year. But if your institution can handle the data, then, it'd be nice to save these indefinitely. And that's the goal here at Hennepin. Hennepin's really good at saving their stuff over long periods of time, and they have a robust IT infrastructure where I think we'll be able to save everything for future research and especially developing AI algorithms.
Okay.
Did I answer?
Jasper and Richard.
Hello there.
Well,
I'm amazed at the this is Richard Levinson at the UC Davis, getting coffee. So I was amazed at the sort of sophistication, complexity, and utility, which is a strange combination, not easy to achieve combination of devices. But I was surprised by the how much work it was to train an algorithm to find where the tissue was, and hours and hours of training and hours of sort of input and then hours of training. And it seems to me that this is something that should be accomplishable very quickly, at least with sort of more modern AI tools. And I just wanted to get your impression on that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think we go a little bit overboard where we do these very intricate maps, where we go through and we really parse out exactly where the tissue is and what the background is. So admittedly, we maybe do spend a little bit too much time building these maps. I will say that this true AI algorithm, especially when you compare it to some of the other ones that are more robust, is relatively slower and more limited compared to some of the other ones. So, but the nice thing is it's relatively inexpensive. This true AI was a $10,000 add-on. I think some of the other platforms require licenses that cost 10, 20 times that amount. And it integrates nicely into our overviews. You can extract overviews and it will recognize our images I wish it was a little bit faster at computing, but it's not a big deal. We just let it run over the weekend, and eventually we'll get a fairly robust algorithm that we then test and then extract more images and feed it additional data. So it's, if you compare it to some of the other ones on the market, it's maybe not as robust and not as fast, but it's significantly less expensive. And it gives us, I think, what is overall a pretty good outcome at the end.
Are you able to put in third-party software into your system, or does it all have to be after the fact?
No, you can add third-party images into the system. We can drag and drop into the Olivia. And
No,
Olivia,
I don't. Not the images. I'm talking about, let's say, another tissue detection algorithm, because people are, in academic places are developing free tools just for fun that work really well, I think.
I haven't actually tried that. I think, I haven't even had the opportunity to try that. I'd love to talk to you more about that. Maybe I can drop in some additional tissue recognition algorithms, although I'm not sure how well they would transfer over into, depending on which file format. The current file format for neural networks is .nn. So theoretically, at least, it's possible. I'd have to talk with some of the Olympus engineers, and that would be really nice. But I think for us, it's probably this neural network is probably, you can extend it to a number of different labs. All the slides essentially look the same. But yeah, I think that's a really good point, worth considering.
Thanks for that nice overview. This was really very helpful. I think many labs are now transitioning to digital, so I think we can learn a lot from each other. How do you deal with the fact that sometimes the scanner breaks down? Because your whole workflow is dependent on it, right? So ideally you have a backup scanner, but of course we all know that they're not cheap.
No, they're not cheap. And this one, I think our full system was about $400,000.
It's expensive.
Yeah, and we learned this the hard way. Thankfully, this one's really quite robust. It only went down on me once over these last few years, where the mechanized stage there was an issue with the mechanized stage. It had to be replaced. And essentially at Arcana, you have a backup scanner. That's easy. But if you don't, you sort of want somebody on site who's able to either cover the images, and of course the fail safe is be on the next flight to Minneapolis. Thankfully,
that's the backup.
That's the backup. Seriously,
yeah.
We have two pathologists who have some experience reading kidneys. Currently, Dr. Lindsay, the previous chair, can step in and help out with that as well, and just read them manually that way. But thankfully, it's really quite robust. The ultimate way is basically to have two scanners, and then that problem goes away.
I guess when you scale up to surgical pathology, this will be, you have to at some point also have additional scanners, right?
Yeah, and they have to be down for a few days every year for annual maintenance, where they clean them and calibrate them and take it apart. So, we do that in conjunction with my medical director site visits. But, it's been fairly robust. The machine is really good and reliable. But, like any other machine, as it ages, problems kind of arise. The other option is to ship the slides overnight. There's ways of doing this, or to ship the tissue to a different lab. But for us, it really hasn't been much of a problem. But yes, that's definitely a downside of any digital technologies. You need to have robust backups, and also for your drives and your PCs and your home PCs, et cetera, and your monitors. So you need a lot of backups to anticipate any failure of the system.
Do you also couple it to a lab management system, or is it a standalone system at the moment?
Totally standalone. We haven't. We're transitioning over to Epic Beaker. So that's a big project from Cerner. So it's a big project at the hospital right now. In my experience, integrating this into an LIS, from what I've seen at other institutions, has been really quite difficult. For now, it's completely a standalone system, where the drives are located outside the hospital, actually, but you need a two-factor authentication method to just reach the slides. So it's really robust as far as HIPAA compliance and patient safety. But admittedly, it is completely separate from a hospital LIS. And I think in some ways, maybe it's much easier to do that way than trying to integrate it and have viewers that are this complicated with histograms and things as part of an LIS. But maybe down the future, especially with Epic being so easy to integrate, it might be a viable strategy for us.
I think, let's say the lab of the future, it will have multiple components. You have the scanners that do certain things. They scan, and you can integrate AI in the scanner itself as well. You have the lab management system, and especially when you scale up, it's going to be more and more important that your lab is organized in a way that it cannot be dependent on standalone machines. And most of the imaging systems, at least here in the Netherlands, they have PACS as well. So like a layer of really the imaging system where we do our work, and sometimes you can even do reporting in the PACS system. And they're now working also, like Sectra, they're working on like a combination to have an ordering module across hospitals, which is quite interesting. So you basically can work from the PACS, and then you can order across hospitals stains. And then, of course, the block has to go to the other hospital if you want to do something particular.
Yeah, no,
It's
that's amazing. That's definitely the future, and a way to integrate digital pathology in sort of a routine daily workflow.
yeah,
We're not quite there yet. For me, this was just get it to a point where we can fully digitize everything on a kidney biopsy. I think kidney is much more difficult to digitize, obviously, than surgical pathology. So that was the first step, and then developing a system of saving the slides and being able to access
yeah,
them even
exactly.
rapidly. But that's definitely the future of how to integrate this technology into the whole thing, where we can
Yeah,
love to
exactly.
have a custom built system where you have ordering, you have image visualization, ability to crop out images, to conference through the same thing, and just make it robust. Because Hennepin also has a number of clinics and hospitals and nephrologists going around. So and this makes it super easy to conference with our nephrologists who love to see this very quickly and digitally. So yeah, that's the future. I really like that comment, and I'm glad you say that. And it sounds like in Amsterdam, you're a bit ahead of us on that level.
Yeah,
Would love to talk
there's
to
a
you
lot
more
of
about that.
digitization at this moment going on, and we're talking about a national infrastructure actually, like they are setting up also in the UK and in Switzerland, which is quite interesting because every hospital is now doing their own slide storage, whereas
Right,
if you do that on a national level, it's probably a lot cheaper. And
right,
also let's say the exchange of slides between centers. I think as renal pathologists, we exchange a lot of, let's say, information between academic hospitals for expertise, or also sometimes for stainings. That I think it will go in that direction. Something that we discussed, it was by chance this morning, the discussion with the head of my department, because we do a lot of remote sign out as well, sometimes also from abroad.
Mhm.
So the distance we can become, let's say my latest victory was signing out a renal case from the plane.
All right,
The,
excellent. All
the
right,
issue is latency. And so it's the
yeah.
internet latency, because it has to go to the satellite on a moving object and then you have to go to the hospital. So do you notice anything latency related in that 2,500
Oh yeah,
kilometers distance? Yeah.
I have tried to do this off of a top of Breckenridge in Summit County, Colorado,
Yeah.
from a laptop at a little coffee shop at about 11,000 feet of altitude.
And
Same problem. No latency was way too long, so there was a bit of a lag. It made it a little bit more difficult. But if you have a regular work structure, even residential internet with fiber optic cable, for instance, or even 5G with a latency of 30 to 50 milliseconds is more than enough.
yeah.
But yeah, doing something like that, from an airplane, that's a whole another level. So congratulations on that.
I just wanted to try.
Yeah,
I had to wait
exactly.
so long before the image is loaded,
Right.
especially the silver. But
Yeah,
yeah, but it
yeah.
worked at the end.
It worked, yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah, it
it'd be
worked.
nice to see. I'd like to test this. Some of our colleagues have boats. I'd love to do some maritime digital
Yeah,
radiology as well. So, but latency is a real thing. However, to your comment, I think most, even just residential internet, even 5G boxes have enough latency where this is relatively quick and easy to do.
yeah. I think it's mostly the distance that these, let's say, the digital information is to travel.
Right.
Because sometimes let's say my colleague said is that, yeah, we have fiberglass internet in the south of France, but they still had problems with latency, which was like 33 milliseconds or so. So it's I think it's the travel at a certain point. yeah, these digital images, they have to travel too far away, and then
Yeah,
they it takes a bit of time to recall them in the system.
the way we do it is we essentially just do a screen share. All of our computing is done at Hennepin with really high-end PCs with powerful graphics cards.
Hmm.
And that's where the computing is done. I have just a little small kind of a block, Dell PC here that I just remote
Ah,
into and do
okay.
screen sharing. And that's one of the ways to overcome the latency.
You don't
So
you don't lose any of the resolution.
no, no
No?
loss in
Okay.
resolution, especially at 4K resolution. You don't lose any resolution that way in with these high-end monitors. So 8K is even better,
Yeah.
but you certainly don't need those $15,000, radiology monitors. So
No,
that's
I
how
don't.
we overcome that is just essentially do all the computing at Hennepin and then you remote into that computer from a separate location. And that does away with a lot of this latency problem.
I'm always surprised that the radiologist needs a higher resolution
Yeah, me too.
device because they
Me
have
too.
less detail than we have.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So. Um, well, anyways,
nice.
that's sort of where it is now. But yeah, these are all standard issues. Latency is a big problem in how to view the images, whether you download them on a local machine
Yeah.
or to view them remotely. And I feel that remoting in is far superior.
What might be interesting that works really well in my end is I have a laptop, which makes it very flexible in terms of space. And through the laptop, I have a VPN, direct VPN connection with the hospital.
Yeah,
So
that's
basically,
ideal.
if I log into my laptop, it's an extension of the network, and
Yep.
I do everything on that, let's say, extension of the network. That works really well if I compare it to logging into a virtual system, for instance. There I get into trouble with basically pixelation of the image, well, all problems
Yeah.
that you have with virtual machines.
We do the exact same thing.
Yeah. Okay.
It's
So
the VPN directly into the hospital network. I'm here with hospital computers that the hospital owns, so it's all really
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
connected and it works exceptionally well.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your comments and questions.
This was really awesome. I don't want to, I know you probably have a lot of things to do, so I don't want to keep you too long because you've been so nice to speak. But, if there are any last comments or questions someone has, and if you're able to stay longer, but I really appreciate it again.
Yeah, of course, I can stay and yield any questions. Thank you so much for the kind words. It's been a pleasure.
It's been awesome. Any last questions?
What's the status of other hospitals here? Brad, Lynn, are you completely digital at the moment? Or?
And actually some of my team was on the call because this sparked so much interest because we just recently went digital, but we don't have the fluorescence capability. I know Lynn, she has a lot. I mean, I'm so glad Lynn referred you. I think at Mayo they have a good bit. Would you know?
Yeah, at Mayo, all of the light microscopy slides are scanned, and then they would like us to look at them digitally. And we don't even have the glass slides delivered to our offices anymore, but they are available. So I'll go out. And even yesterday, I had a case is IgA nephropathy. There's a tiny, tiny little area of necrosis, and our slides are scanned at 40x. But there was a tiny, tiny little bit of necrosis that looked like that's probably what it was, but I couldn't say for sure. It could have been, a thrombus or, red blood cells or something just because of the focus or something. I mean, maybe this is a technical aspect, but this is, I think the biggest limitation is like when there's some tiny little lesion like that, in this case necrosis, and I had to go and get the glass slides and review those, and it was clear what it was on the glass slides, and I'm sorry, glass slides are still better. They're still better.
And is it because of the Z
But I
stacking, you
mean,
mean, or?
yeah, for most things, it's fine.
Yeah.
But for some situations like that, or if you have like early membranous glomerulonephritis or some little spicules for amyloid or something like that. I mean, you have other things like for membranous, you have the immunofluorescence. For amyloid, you have the Congo red. Like you don't really need to see it, so it's like good enough, but it's not, the best, I think. But yeah, I mean, that said, all of our cases are scan, and the majority of the cases I just sign out, based um, on the scanned slide. But we don't have immunofluorescence yet. We don't have a slide scanner or a system for that. Actually, that was another question. Sorry if I missed it. But how long does it take how long is the slide scanning for your IF slides? Because that's
Yeah,
also been a big limitation for us, is that it takes so long, especially for our volume.
yeah, let me go back to that. So here's a difference. If we have on the left here is 20x bright field PAS.
We don't see your screen.
Oh, trying to share. How's that? Is that any better?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so on the left here we
Okay.
have,
Yeah, sorry.
yeah. No worries. So something comparable size, 20x PAS would take about 35 seconds. Definitely slower, but not terribly much slower, about 47 seconds for the same. Something very similar. So about, I don't know, about 30-40% slower.
But that's still reasonable, but that's because you're able to recognize the tissue. So I think that's been another drawback when we've been evaluating. I have slide scanners, as I mentioned to you before, but it's like we've had trouble having, recognizing the tissue. And then of course your DAPI, cover slip media will help for that. But that was a drawback with the IF.
Yeah, that was an initial problem for me as well when I was working on this project, is how do I recognize the tissue at 2x without completely photo bleaching it on the overview scan, right? Because you really have to crank up the fluorescence intensity. There's a couple of ways to do it on this machine. One is just throwing some DAPI on your cover slipping medium. So as soon as it makes contact with the tissue, you have it. The other way is to use the dark field feature of the scanner. So it's the 4 out of the 5 microscope capabilities here. And then you can actually see it really well in almost like a 3D way on dark field for fluorescence recognition. But DAPI really is the shortcut here, and that was the answer. And the other thing that the DAPI does is it's not only for tissue recognition, but it also uses the DAPI channel to focus. And that way you're not at all photo bleaching your tissue or exposing it in any way under the green or red channel. Everything, all the tissue recognition and focusing is done with DAPI. And then you quickly switch over at 10 millisecond exposure per frame at 20 or 40x, and then you can quickly go over everything, and that completely prevents any degree of photo bleaching. Photo bleaching is a major problem here, especially with trainees. They'll park over the 1 glom and just completely burn it. This prevents that. And then, we have to throw away our slides after a couple of weeks. They're not fixed. And then this way we can save them forever. So that was kind of the technical thing I had to overcome initially, but there's at least a couple of ways to do that that's clever and easy to build into your workflow. At Arcana, they use machines to automatically cover slip. So we just buy a bunch of this DAPI cover slipping reagent, and we just throw into the machine, and you don't notice any difference in your fluorescence signal because the DAPI blue is so far away on the spectrum that it doesn't in any way interfere with your green or red. So that's one way to do it. And there's other nuclear stains you can try as well, but I think DAPI is, in my opinion, the best for renal.
There's something else I just wanted to comment on, thinking of our practice at Mayo. Of course, we have our own lab. Most of our cases are wet tissue cases, but for patients coming to Mayo, then we review the outside slides, and there is such variability from, in the section quality. So especially when you're dealing with scanned slides, it's so important. Not from Hennepin, of course, those are excellent. But but there's, it's so important to have a good histology technician and not have a lot of wrinkles on the slides. Because of course, if you have, the glass slides and you can focus up and down and I think the machines are better able to find the tissue and focus on the tissue. But if you don't have a very good section to begin with, and there's great variability, of course, then that's another limitation of evaluating the scanned slides.
Yeah, so one of the things you sometimes run into is folds in particular, little folds on the tissue. And if you're as unlucky as I am, you'll get the one fold over the 1 glom and you're looking for the tip lesion or necrotizing lesion, this machine has the ability to do Z stacking. So you can actually Z stack through that fold, and then you can either overlay it or you can kind of focus up and down through that fold. So you can do that as well digitally. But it does, this does really rely on super high quality histology, and this is something we're always working on with our techs. Search pads, you can get away with a lot more, but kidney in particular, all the lesions are so focal, as you guys know, this is the headache and renal, that everything has to be flat. The images have to be really, I think, more robust in quality than your run-of-the-mill surgical pathology, where you have 20 square millimeters of the same exact cancer cell. So yes, to that question, it does rely, on high quality histology, and that does become, a problem with digital pathology. But then again, that's the problem, even if you have that on glass. And to your comment, as far as these small little lesions, whether it's superior, some people will always prefer glass. To me, things like being able to overlay channels and then to be able to compare two slides next to each other is such a tremendous step forward that I think these ultrafocal lesions, even if we likely don't miss them, but you can overcome that as well with these Z stacks on the machine. So yeah, I mean, I think ultimately some people always prefer the pushing around the glass and having that minor nuance and being able to drop the condenser and things of that nature. But I think this, once you get used to it, for me, honestly, I don't know if I could go back to glass after doing this. When the machine's down for annual maintenance, I have to use the glass, and it's definitely, by the time you clean off the sticky stuff that they cover slip with off your stage, by the time you find your tissue by looking up at the light, this, that, and the other, this makes actually reading much faster, and I think in a lot of ways more accurate. Anyways, those are my comments. I'm a big fan of this, obviously. This is what I do. Yeah, excellent questions and excellent comments. Thank you, Lynn.
I think it's also, I mean, you don't have to have everything in top quality the first scan. Yeah? So something you can also do if you couple it to a lab management system and say rescan at 60x resolution in Z-stack because you think that there's a focal lesion or maybe small deposits. But that's typically, you can do that in the second round.
Yeah, we
for
do
IF,
that.
For IF also, because IF takes time, as you say, Lynn, and I think what you can do also is to do it at a lower resolution. If it's negative, it's negative. Or if it's super positive, it's super positive. And if you have doubt, you rescan it at a higher resolution or something like that to really speed it up.
That's
we do around maximum of 6 cases, 6-7 cases per day. Yeah, IF. But we have 2 IF scanners also, so we have a backup.
Okay. And as far as polarization, what is everybody else's comments on polarization?
It looks very nice what you're doing, and I want it also.
Yeah.
I think we can do it in our 3D Histech device, but it's not up and running yet. But I want to have it.
All right, excellent.
Yeah,
cool.
we also don't have that ability, but that was part of our evaluation for our IF slide scanners because some of these offer polarization. So, but our just regular light microscopy scanners, we can't polarize. So that's another thing. We go and grab the slides. In case of ATN, I'll grab the slides, polarize because I want to be missing oxalate neuropathy.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's the one thing that was originally big objective of the project was to develop it so you can fully own the biopsy, so you don't have to phone a friend to do something for you, so you can finalize the case. And this makes that possible. So I think we're lucky. This is the only machine that I know of that can do all of this under one platform, under one roof, under one machine. And it's relatively not that expensive compared to some of the other scanners. So I think this is definitely the future for renal.
3D Histech can do it also with add-ons. Right. I have a IF add-on and also polarization add-on.
Which one is that? Which one
3D Histech.
3D Histech. Oh, awesome.
The B250 we have here, I think.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I'd love to see some of your polarized images too.
Me too. In the future. IF is, IF I can show you. It's very nice. I'm very happy with it. Yeah.
Nice. Very good.
Great session. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. This was really great. Yeah. Thank you so much. And we'll post the recording and you may get some more questions and maybe we'll revisit this at another session too.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's been a pleasure.
Okay.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you all so much. Y'all take care.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you.